Tell me, please, what do the Bhutanese read, or maybe some oral tradition, traditional
Mhm,
storytelling, theater art are still more important?
mhm.
Important.
Okay, so Bhutan has become writing, reading culture only since about 50 or 60 years ago. Before that, we were largely an oral society where we were just telling stories. But in the end of 1950s and into 60s, the government policy was to educate everybody, give educational access to everybody. And that was the time when um, we opted to use English as the medium of instruction. So most of our school, right from kindergarten, right up to tertiary level education, we learned to read and write in English. And therefore, the result was that most people now read and write in English. Although the oral tradition, especially among the older people, especially in the rural areas, is still very relevant. And now there is also a realization that there is a danger that the oral tradition might disappear because the written and writing language is so prominent. So this is kind of a two situation we have that we have to somehow find a harmonious blend.
So what about writers? How big is the writing community in Bhutan?
It's a
And
very, very small,
oh,
yeah, it's
okay.
a very, very small community of writers because what has happened is that we didn't go through the natural kind of evolution from coming from a traditional oral society to the writing literary society. We sort of jumped and went into the digital.
Okay. So is there
Because all this happened within the last 50, 60 years. So
uh-huh.
now with all the digital um, gadgets available, most people prefer to read, write, communicate everything digitally. So it's a very small group of people who write. And of course, there's also a smaller group who write in the Bhutanese language. So there are two languages that are being used simultaneously.
Yeah, I was about to ask you about this. So is there a strong division between authors writing in English and Jongha?
Mm-hmm. No, there isn't a big division because both the languages are taught in the schools. So
Mm-hmm.
people who read and write in Dzongkha and English is their choice. So we have as many writers in writing in Dzongkha as well as in English.
Okay. Are women interested in literature? I mean, how many female authors you've got?
Mm-hmm. I can't tell you exactly how many women authors are there, but it is quite interesting that many of the people who started writing in English, I think there were more women writers.
Ah,
Yeah, there were more women writers. I cannot tell you the numbers, but a lot of women who went to school and when you choose what you want to specialize in, many of them studied for English literature. So
okay.
they have a background in, they have an academic background in English literature. So many of them write and write it more than prose. Most young writers write poetry. They love poetry. So we have a lot of people writing the numbers are small. Comparatively, the numbers are small, but there is a definite group of women who like to write poetry, who like to write short stories, who like to write, fiction. Yeah.
And what kind of topics women cover? I mean, um, some culturally specific, or every woman from a different culture can easily identify with them.
Mm-hmm. I think it's because it's just 1 or 2 generations that we were oral society. Most people started delving or looking back into their own roots, and many of them started writing on folklore and stories from their own culture. And there are very few who write fiction or things like this, but most of them fall back because they have their grandmothers, they have their, older people in things, and they've heard the stories. So I think, like me, I also write mostly based on my oral background. I take stories from there and the situation in the villages where I grew up. That is very real and relevant to me and needs to find a voice. And I think many women who have written stories for children mostly, because we were children when we listened to these stories. So mostly for children's stories. And, it's, in a way, I feel it's we have come to a time when we really need to go back to the literary tradition. Many people find it so much easier to have everything snap of a finger, no? Yeah, so, yeah. But there are as many women, and there are also women academics who go in for higher studies and publish their PhDs and their, master's thesis. And they all have somehow the background or the base is always in their own culture.
Okay,
so not a lot of big creative writers, but a lot based on their cultures. Yeah.
Okay, so I think I understand why you choose English, because in 2005 your first novel was published. First novel written in English by women. So why did you choose English?
That's a long story. I told you until the end of 1950s into the 60s, we did not have schools for everybody. We had schools for the monasteries, for the monks. And when the government decided now we have to educate our children, we were sent out because there were no schools at that time, no conventional modern schools. We had the monastic schools, which taught only religion and religious practice. So when they decided to send us to schools, because there was no schools in the 1960s, I started studying first in 1962. Because there were no schools, my age group people who had access to education in English were sent to India.
Oh, really?
So there were no schools. Yes, the schools were just being built up. Okay. The monastic schools were there, but not everybody could go. So the common regular schools were being built up only in the 1960s. So many of us, my age group and even a little bit older than me, we were sent to schools in India. So my entire education was in English because I went to study in a school in India, which was run by missionaries, the Irish convent. So I was in a boarding school, and a lot of my age group cohort also had a similar experience. So we had our entire education in English, and it was much easier to write in English, although we could have struggled with our own language, and then it wouldn't have been so easy for us. But so it was the most language that we spoke, the language that we worked with, the language that we felt most comfortable with. So that was the reason.
Can you tell us about your path to writing? Your first novel, for example, it was a non-fiction related to Bhutanese traditions.
That was my book on the folk tales of Bhutan. Okay, folk tales of Bhutan. And how it came about is until I went to school in India, after I was already 9 years old, all the stories that I heard were from the villagers, from my parents, from my older elders of the village, and they were very important for me. but I didn't realize how important they were when I was sent to school in India where nobody spoke my language and I could not understand every, the conversations going on. And I was very lonely, because I couldn't speak. Everybody spoke English, and the girls who were in school had their own languages, Indian languages, and I was the only girl who was a Bhutanese who was speaking only my language, and I couldn't communicate. And I went through a period when I was very, very lonely. So in my loneliness, especially in the nights when I was sleeping, I used to tell myself my stories in my language, to feel comfort. And it's really important for me because I could relate. Although everything in India in the school was very different, I could tell in my head, the stories, I knew the grandfathers, I knew the fox that came. So I used to tell the stories, and that was really important for me to keep my sanity, literally. All right. And then when I had my own children, much, much later when I married and I had my children, and I'm married to a man from Switzerland. So we had the cultural difference of me being Bhutanese, he being Swiss. And at the time we were living in the United States because we went back to study. And my children used to often ask, what are we? Who are we? We are not Americans. We are not, who are we? So I thought this is the same kind of question that I was dealing with in my childhood. And I think it's very important for them to know that they have a Bhutanese background and that they're in America just for the time being. And I said, I have to document my stories for my children and children like them who are completely alienated from their culture. And I thought it would be kind of a gift or a legacy for my children to write the stories. So I wrote down the stories, but then I realized there were many other children who were also in the same situation. So that's when I thought I should publish it. And I was lucky to find a publisher. And that was my first book in 1996. Yeah.
1996, yes. So who is your target audience of your books? I mean, English speaker from Bhutan or Westerners?
When I wrote my first book, it was really for the children of Bhutan. It was kind of a gift for them so that they could remember or they could hold on to the stories that they had heard. Then when tourism became important and the country opened to tourism, a lot of people came to Bhutan and there was not much available, not many written works in English. So my first book, Folk Tales, was a curiosity and many people started looking for it, buying it. So it was quite successful. I could reprint about several times. And so it became intentionally for the Bhutanese, but it also was, the ripple effect was that it was also, the audience became wider as more and more people became interested in the folk stories of Bhutan.
Bhutan is now opening to international tourism, and it considered, for example, in Europe as a really interesting and a little bit mysterious country. Do you think, in your opinion, can this opening for tourism gain international recognition for Bhutanese literature?
Because of, as I already said, that because there is a lack, there's not much written. We don't have a very strong current literary tradition. So, most of my books and most of the books written by Bhutanese, especially in English, the biggest bookshop is in the airport.
Of course.
Airport, yeah? Which means that they are really targeting the international audience.
Yeah.
And tourism is not restricted as such, but there is a condition of paying what we call the sustainable development fee, which is $100 straight for every day. And lot of people who read English do buy, I think, because most people, like whenever we go to another country, we want a souvenir that will take back some memories. You have the pictures, you have the recollection, but you want to also have some reminder in form of books.
Yes.
And that's why I think books have become very important for tourists to come and take as a memento of Bhutan. And also some of the travel agents have listed the books available in English. So they already know what they have to buy. So it has been good. And now we have, after the COVID, after 2019, there was a lull, there was a stop, nothing happened. But now it's opening up again, and it's going quite well. And just for your interest, yesterday, because I have a museum and a guest house, so yesterday, coincidentally, we had 10 people from Poland coming to eat lunch at museum. And I couldn't communicate with them because they didn't speak any English, but they enjoyed their lunch. And so you see, we are connected through tourism. Unfortunately, I have no translations in Polish. So but books are really an important item for souvenirs. Whether they read it or not, they may just buy it and put it up on their shelf and say, I went to Bhutan and this is a book. Yeah.
Okay, I have to ask you, are Bhutanese people in Bhutan, in fact, the happiest people in the world?
Actually, in the international index,
Yes.
it's not Bhutan. It's Norway. Is it Norway? Yeah,
Yes.
it's Norway are the happiest. It's the happiest country in the world. Bhutanese would like to be the happiest, and I think at one time, we had very little.
Yes.
And when you have little and you don't know what is out there, we could be very content. But happiness as a concept is very fleeting. You can be very happy. I'm very happy my internet is working just now. Yeah. So happiness just goes from one level to the other. So most people, it's become a kind of a catchword for many people to make Bhutan the happiest people. And many people are even using it without really thinking about it. But our government and our people have always stressed on the welfare of the people. I mean, we are not a rich country, but our major stress, even in the planning, in the allocation of the budget for the country, it's always been for the welfare of the country. I mean, you measure how much money is made in this stock exchange or how much is made by this factory. We measure how much time do you have to spend with your family? How much time do you spend, doing, going and praying? Or how much time do you spend in contemplation, just thinking? So these things, I think, are important for us. And this, if it's all together, it's contentment that we're looking for.
Thank you so much.
But to be the happiest country, you have to come and see for yourself if you are the happiest country.
I would like to. I really would like to. Maybe I will manage.
Yeah, one day. Yeah.
I hope so. Thank you for this conversation. It was really interesting.
Thank you.